Welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we've discontinued our usual in-person events and instituted online webinars. Without our previous revenue-generating programs, we now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to continue to pay our Mexican staff. You can donate at our website, globaljusticecenter.org. Any amount you can donate would be appreciated. Today, we have a report on a rather unique event. This Saturday, there was a global people's summit on food. It was a 24-hour event that spanned the entire globe. A pretty impressive undertaking. Some of you may have seen it. I'm sure that none of you saw all 24 hours, but all of it, I understand, is available on YouTube, and we'll hear more about that in a minute and about how it was organized. We have with us today two of the people who were involved in the event, and they will be reporting on it and summarizing the highlights from it. Ercilia Soares is Latin American Director of Regeneration International, and incidentally was formerly Executive Director of the Center for Global Justice. We're always happy to have her back with us on an event like. We also have with us Precious Theory, who is African Director of International Regeneration International, and she will be reporting from Zimbabwe. So let me turn the floor over first to Ercilia, and she and Precious will tell us about it, and afterwards we will then have a question and answer period where you all can raise questions and make comments. Okay, Ercilia, take it away.
Can you hear me well? Good, thank you. Thank you, Cliff, Roberto, Center for Global Justice. Thank you, Precious, for being here. I know it's 9 p.m. for you, and we've had quite, as Cliff was mentioning, we had quite a day on Saturday. We actually started Friday night with the Pacific segment of the Food Summit. So it was a long day, I must say, but we're happy to be here and happy to be sharing with you some of the highlights. And before we get there, perhaps I would like to talk a little bit about the genesis of this alternative food summit or People's Food Summit. And I must say that we started talking about this, Precious, it must have been like May this year or something like that we started thinking about, well, how can we make this possible? And for many of us, it was also part of a report that we had read that had been issued in February of last year, 2020, by the ETC group. The ETC group, some of you may be familiar with it. It's a small organization, it's a small nonprofit, but they have they do wonderful research on issues that have to do with use of technology in agriculture, with corporate takeover of food chains and food systems. So they're a great watchdog, and was basically called, and I will share that with you if you'd like me to. It's called The Three Big Battles for Global Food Policy Looming. So what it says is basically that the whole World Food System Summit, which was going to happen, which just happened this year, is part of a three-pronged corporate food policy power grab. And what ETC said is there's a corporate alliance, which is a corporate alliance in which you can see actors like, Syngenta, DuPont, Dow Chemical, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that, the usual suspects. And this alliance is an alliance between Big Ag, the World Economic Forum on the other side, and then philanthrocapitalists, or so-called philanthrocapitalists, which have, in a way, been spearheading three different initiatives. One is the Food System Summit. The other one is restructuring research institutions. This is what we're seeing. I think our Foreign Precious will talk about more what is happening in Africa with AGRA, with the Alliance for the New Green Revolution, and the acceleration of data collection, which in a way is digitalizing agriculture, right? And what they want to do is ultimately what they are looking for is this separate but joint initiatives are trying to change or transform the agreements or the idea that we traditionally had on food and agricultural systems. And what they did also, and this is not part of the ATC report, but what we saw after all these months and last year too, is what they've been doing is, with the false promise of making an open, a transparent, a participatory summit, they invited so-called organizations, they invited civil society to participate in the World Food Summit. But the selection of the participants was very secretive. There was never an open call to civil society. There was never an open call to movements and grassroots organizations to be part of the drafting and of the decisions that would take place during World Food Day and the summit in general. So I guess, I'm not saying anything new because we keep saying the same thing at most UN summits. But basically, what they did is they were able to bias the decision of who was going to take part in the summit in such a way that they gave more importance to the corporate agenda over social movements, over civil society, and over, of course, agroecology and regenerative movements. So seeing that corporate takeover, which also minimizes even the role of the state in food systems, we decided that we had to come up with an alternative summit. We started having conversations in early May about this, how this could be possible and how could this be authentic? How could we bring the voices of practitioners, the voices of regenerators, that are actually the ones that, do feed the world. We have had these talks and these conversations before about how 80% of the food that we eat is actually produced by small farmers who actually don't own much of the land, right? So it was Regeneration International and other friend allies, other organizations. We ended up being over 50 organizations from Australia, Asia, India, Africa, Europe, Latin America, North America, that joined forces, and we decided to come up with a 24-hour global event on food. And it was, depending on each segment, I had, I was telling you before, I had the segment for Latin America, which did run from 4 to 8 p.m. Mexico time. But each area had its own theme. Of course, it was all centered on food, and it was centered on small farmers and the real food producers. But the main topic for Latin America for our segment was food sovereignty and the threats to food sovereignty. So perhaps I can talk a little bit more about how we divided our segment and what we discussed, but I don't know if, Precious, if you would like to add something before I go there on the reason why we started this.
Yeah, thank you, Ersi. And again, I'd like to apologize in advance because my internet may be bumpy. So if it is getting bumpy, please give me a sign so that I won't continue talking. So hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having Ersi and I. We're both from RI, and over the years, as we've worked together, we've become really good friends, almost like sisters, but just worlds apart. And so I think we've worked with a lot of diverse groups and energy towards creating the People's Food Summit. I think one of the things was how we organized ourselves, which is, I think, also really important to bring out because first of all, this was 24 hours around the globe. And we were, I think all of us are now experts in calculating time zones and knowing what time things will be happening where, as well as, with really the core team at Regeneration International. If anything, it's a small group of very passionate people. So I think we run on passion, and afterwards they're like, oh boy. So like some of our tech guys were working like 18 hours, and we had regional tech support as well, but our core team is very small. And so the idea was this summit, as Ersi has given the background, will then represent the voices of those people that are feeding most of the world, honestly. And in our regions, in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia, I think most parts, for example, here, about 80% of the food is really from smallholder farmers. And so each region had their theme, that's for sure, because I think as RI, as a global network, we really wanted to also honor the differences in the bioregions and the uniqueness of each region to then bring out issues that are pertinent to that region. And I think that was the beauty and the strength of it. So the people that were in that summit and that group of people in that time zone will definitely relate to the issues. But people from other time zones also joined the conversation. So that gave enrichment, and people asked questions, and so I think the whole idea was to really honor the differences in the cultures that hold our planet together, and these are people that are thriving and striving to make a change every day in the sectors of food systems. So yeah, that's just in brief, just how things were organized. And there's beauty in chaos, and I think nature doesn't work in lines, so we are a true representative of planet Earth at this point, but it was successful and we are very happy. So Ersi, do you want to go ahead?
Sure.
Or you want us to be talking back and forth? It's okay.
No.
And yeah. And Cliff, and you can be asking questions if you feel like there's other things that you like us to bring up.
Of course. I was thinking perhaps I could talk a little bit about how we organized my segment, and then I can also bring up some of the common things that I noticed throughout the different panels and and perhaps you could do the same, Precious, and then let me know if I'm forgetting something. But basically, we had our segment divided in 4 parts. I want to pull it up just so that I don't forget anything. We had our segment divided in four parts. The first part was an introduction to the UN Food Summit, and really kind of opening that black box that it is, and bringing all the the pieces out of it, and showing the who is who in that summit. And that was an excellent presentation by Veronica Villa from ETC Group. So she's the Mexican representative of ETC, both her and Silvia Ribeiro, who many of you are probably familiar by her articles in La Jornada. So that was an excellent presentation of ETC Group. And after that, we wanted to say, well, okay, that is horrible. So is that all there is, or is there an actually, positive alternative? Is there people who are actually doing wonderful things? And yes, we know there are. So we wanted to show them. And we started with one question, which is kind of taking down that false dichotomy. Sorry, that's my dog sneezing. She's got allergies. That false dichotomy between production and regeneration. So what we wanted to show is that if you regenerate your ecosystem, you actually are able to produce more. There's not such dichotomy. There's not that manichaeism as they usually want to show us. So during that first segment, we had representatives from Savory Hub, which they do holistic management. Precious would know way more than I do because she's a practitioner of holistic management. And we had a representative from Chile who gave a great presentation about the work that they are doing and the Chilean Savory Hub. Representative from Costa Rica, who's also part of Costa Rica Regenerativa. There's at least 3 experiences in Latin America, countries that are coming up with very, very organized with what they call regenerative chapters. Costa Rica being one of the leading ones, and then Uruguay and Chile also being ahead of the game there. Then we had a couple of people from Brazil who do agroforestry. We had an awesome presentation about the importance of biodiversity and agroforestry, and they showed, how our diets have changed. That from having, hundreds of plants that we used to cultivate many, many years ago, we now come down to 3 main plants that are part of our diet. So how diverse we used to be and how not diverse we're now. And then Roberto Ugaz, who's a researcher from La Universidad de La Molina in Lima in Peru, he gave a great presentation. He basically showed us Latin America, different centers of origin, and how intertwined the Latin American culture and the food culture has been, from forever. And even the representation in pre-Columbian times from different cultures, both in the Andes and in Mesoamerica, showing food in paintings and sculptures that go back to centuries ago. After that, we had some short videos, and then we had another part which was other practitioners. So we had seed keepers from Ecuador, from the Guardian Seed Network, which is one of the largest networks here in Latin America. We had a person from Argentina who is, he calls himself the reciclador urbano, or the urban recycler. But basically, is this guy who has taken thousands of roofs that were, basically empty or naked in Buenos Aires, and has created these edible gardens. showing that there's really no excuse to be hungry or to have no food, because you can produce food in tiny spaces and plenty of nutritious food. We had a researcher and writer, journalist more, showing that aspect too, which is the chronicle, the storytelling, which is very important for us. We had someone from Brazil who talked about yaca or jackfruit. Then we had Lady Pech, who you're probably familiar with. She won the Goldman Environmental Prize this year. She's a Goldman Environmental Prize recipient, and she's a Mayan beekeeper. So it was a lot of stories of resistance and agroecology within the Maya people and the south of Mexico. And then I'm not gonna, almost done, I swear. And then we had, it was 4 hours, Then we had something very interesting, which is IFOAM is a very important part of the Regeneration International Network. So, and the reason why we like IFOAM is because they have a different attitude to what the organic world sometimes tend to be. In other words, they do think about the importance of taking organic out of the niche, so that organic food shouldn't be so expensive, shouldn't be so unreachable, shouldn't be so impossible for people to actually eat well. And one of the ways they are able to do that is they have this certification system, which is participatory SPG, participatory guarantee system. I think I'm doing the acronym in Spanish, but basically it's peer-to-peer certification and participatory, so that it's not super expensive for people to be able to get certified. So we had a couple of experiences from those folks, and then we ended up with this awesome woman who's also a friend, which is Adelita San Vicente, who's part of the Semarnat, the Secretary of Environment here in Mexico. And it was important to have her kind of close in the session, because you probably know that last week we were able to continue the prohibition on GM corn here in Mexico. So that was super important, and we wanted to show that that triumph of organized forces being able to defeat these type of movements. So that was great. And I don't know, Precious, if you want me to go over some of the things that were discussed, or would you like to talk about Africa before your segment?
I was thinking maybe let me also just dive in a little bit broadly on what we did in Africa, and then we can touch again the whole thing. And at some point, if you have the pledge, I think we can also share with others that we actually shared the regenerative pledge with,
yes,
with our audiences, and maybe we'll also share some of the figures of the viewership that we feel are also important, the reach that we did on that event. Okay, so I think I'll just share briefly about Africa. I was also pulling out some of the few points, the key points of how we organized ourselves in Africa. So my strategy as a coordinator in the African region, which has hundreds of thousands of farmer groups, smallholder farmer groups that are working with different networks. But then as RI, we've also been plugging into the regional networks that are working. I'm personally working very closely to a network here in Southern Africa called Seed and Knowledge Initiative, which started off as pushing really the agenda of seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, but then it went broader into agroecology, the whole practice, and enabling small organizations to then implement their work and then also scale up. And there are other country-based networks, one called Pelham, which works with, again, small organizations, but becoming many because of the clusters that they create. And then there's one called SCOPE, which works with schools in both Southern and East Africa. And then we have West African Brothers, but then above all, we have a big network here called AFSA, which is Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. They really have membership across all countries in Africa, except for about 5 countries that are yet to join. So they cut across the English-speaking, French-speaking, Portuguese-speaking. So they're really awesome. And the leader, who's also the coordinator of AFSA, his name is Dr. Million Belay, was the keynote for our segment, which meant we wanted or we desired him to share broadly on issues facing or threatening the sovereignty of food and agriculture in the African continent in this moment, where he dove a lot in the issue of AGRA, which is an arm of Green Revolution funded by the Bill Gates Foundation and all the other big corporations that you know, but they're putting billions of dollars towards magnifying the Green Revolution movement basically in Africa, and they are impacting even the research spaces. So right now, I think that's what is under threat. And so we have small community groups. We are also, I think, as networks, pushing forward for citizens-based research so that farmers can continue to show results. Because what happens is AGRA reports successes that they really fetch from the air in most cases. And I'm sure most of you who are well and better read than maybe some of us are, you know, stories of India, how farmers commit suicide because the more you have synthetic inputs in the soil, the reality is your soil continues to die and demands more and more, and farmers end up in debt and they do not see a way out in agriculture. And that leads to depression and suicidal moments for most farmers. So I think this is where now Africa becomes a target. It's like fresh ground for these initiatives coming like, oh, we're coming to advance agriculture, have technology, make farming easier for farmers. But it usually doesn't become easier because I think that these Green Revolution practices are based on assumptions that things must work the same everywhere, you know, discarding the power and the cultural relevance of each of the practices and foods that are being given to farmers. You know, I think that's the simplest way I can put it. And in most cases, we've seen that it fails, but then they work through governments and they have these agreements with governments. But farmer groups are getting stronger and stronger. And so that was Dr. Million's view and keynote to give that broader view of what's happening on the continent right now, and also really bring out the importance of agroecology as a transformative opportunity. Our theme, the African continent, was regenerating the culture of food in Africa, basically rescuing the culture of food from industrialization. So over and above the broadness of the theme and having Dr. Million share broadly on how industrial agriculture has been impacting our continent, we also had someone who was going to share on practice, spirituality, and rituals that go around food. So they work with agroecology and farming, smallholder farmers who have about 1 to 2 hectares of land each in this beautiful region here in Zimbabwe. And so now you're linking together the spirituality of how you then produce food, how it brings together community, and Thanksgiving. For me, how I analyzed that, I was like, the idea of Thanksgiving after a harvest is really an idea of creating an abundance mentality, which means if you're thankful, you're ready to share, which is how our culture has been built around food. Actually, last week, for interest's sake, I was sharing with one of the communities that I was training, and we're creating a vision of values using the holistic decision-making framework. And one community member said, yeah, we need to be people that share the surplus. And there was a nice challenge amongst the community members. They're like, so what if you don't have a surplus? You're not going to share? And so for me, that sounded like lots of abundance mentality, to say the spirit of Ubuntu is I share. When I'm okay, my neighbor should also be okay. And then we had West Africa, that were also sharing their challenges on the implementations of agroecology practices and policy issues. So that was also good. And then we had someone from Uganda who was sharing on their program of schools, how they're turning school grounds to food gardens. So they work with young children. So to catch them young and introduce them to agroecology through permaculture and growing their own food. And this, I think, will be an incredible program to probably replicate across Africa, because donors go to these schools and donate food, which has, I think we should also run away from the idea of describing food as nutritious, because nutrition has been segmented into small parts of vitamins, this and that. But then I think if you say healthy food, health is really over and above the nutrients. It's how was this food grown? How is the health of where it's coming from and who made it? So I think we're driving towards healthy, nutritious food. So, and then we had someone share actually a meal, how they prepared a traditional meal of pumpkin leaves. And then they also spoke about food sovereignty, because she's actually a professor and lecturer at the University of North Carolina. She's an African girl from Zimbabwe, and she shared that meal and her work in food sovereignty. And then we had a storyteller telling us the story of her grandfather and food, and how people were organized around food, and how you wouldn't go hungry whenever you visited any family at all. You would get in and eat whatever you needed, as long as you didn't carry anything away. So that means you'll be covered for your whole journey, whether people knew you or not. And then we had a huge story of festivals around food and seeds. So it's called the Good Food and Seeds Festival. And then last, to cap the event, we had a professional chef who was trying foods and traditional cuisines and sharing the story of food in Africa. So that was how we were organized, just to bring out the story, including what challenges people face in the practice and the awareness building. So it was really eventful, very colorful, and very educative. So yeah, I think that was my bit. And I think if we were to look across the regions, when we left from Africa, I think we hit Europe, where we had someone actually share the wheat that they produce, and then milling it and making a whole pizza meal on video. And also they were talking about what impacts what affects their agroecological practices in that side of the world. So I do feel like we brought in a lot of stories of actual farmers on the ground and movements that are involved in moving forward the movement of agroecology, regeneration, and all the practices that are building seed and food sovereignty. And you can call it good seed and good food sovereignty. Yeah. So I think, Ersi, that's a brief of what I had to share. I don't know how much time we actually have left. Let's see. Okay. I think we're good.
Well, we have 90 minutes if you want to take full advantage of it. I'm sure that there's much more to say from 24 hours of material. That's a lot to digest. But there are also questions I'm sure that many will want to ask. I know I have a load of questions. I've been taking notes as you've spoken. Cecilia, are there other things that you want to add before we go to Q&A?
Sure. Well, maybe perhaps I could share some of the kind of highlights or ideas that are a little bit, I feel, transversal or the cross-cutting throughout the event. I'm sure Precious has others as well, but there were some things that were shared by some of our colleagues and other people who are running segments. One was that And this idea that the transformation of the food system must be based on the involvement of people to people, the importance of that. The other one is that it's very important is to create the creation of an ecological economy, which takes into account the basic needs of all people and the care for nature. That was another big thing. And the other one, which is kind of funny, and it works in English or in Spanish, but that we need to experience. We're going through a critical period as humans, and there is a need for a transformation from ego to eco, right? To go from the individualism, the ego, just looking at myself, to the eco, to recognizing the others and the others in and within nature. And then I think that another important part of it was, and this is something that happened during the segment in the US. The organizer from the US shared this thought with us, which is that in the US program, it's US and Canada, actually, they also had some people from Canada. They heard from, seed savers racing against extinction of varieties lost to climate, war and industrialization, organic dairy farmers at the mercy of multinational corporations, regenerative organic farmers seeking economic value from the environmental benefits they provide, ranchers regenerating economies as they regenerate land damaged by industrial agriculture, Black farmers looking for justice in the face of pervasive government racism, and Indigenous farmers defending food waste going back thousands of years from corporations seeking short-term profits at the expense of the water and climate we all need to survive. And the thought after this is what she shared with us is that as she was putting together the program, each of the situations were in silos in her mind. But as she heard the speakers presenting, she realized that all the struggles are intertwined. And so how much we need each other and how necessary is that we ensure one another's success. I think that's kind of an important message to keep in mind. The other thing is that was also shared is that land is power, and the forces of colonization and capitalism have allowed those who care for the land to be displaced by those who care to exploit it. But we are all up against the same limits. We all need to breathe and drink and eat. No one can live on a dead planet. And that brings me back to one of the things that we discussed during my segment, which is this sort of planetary boundaries and how we've, overpassed all those boundaries without realizing that, there are limits that we need to keep and that we need to be mindful of. So those were some of the thoughts that were, brought up during the event. I don't know if Precious, before we go to Q&A, if you have any other thoughts about that?
No, I mean, I think that captures it all. So it was, it was diverse, but uniform. I mean, the same to a certain extent. So, because the issues are the same, which draws into policies that would support whole systems, management of land and growth of food. Yeah. So maybe you can ask some questions and we see if we can answer effectively.
Okay. Since our audience is mainly on YouTube, watching us from there, they don't have any way of directly asking questions. And so if you are on YouTube and want to say something, send it in an email to global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. and I'll pass your question or comment on to Celia and Precious. Let me start off. Like I said, I have a lot of questions or topics I'd like to ask you about. You used a couple terms which I'm sure are familiar to most of our listeners, but some may need a little clarification. Food sovereignty and food sustainability. Can you define what is meant by those concepts?
Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Either.
sure. Well, there's usually we talk about either food sovereignty or it's not sustainability. It's more like I'm trying to translate it in my mind. We talk about food security, right? But maybe I don't know, Precious, if you also mentioned another term, but there's
for me, sovereignty is security and control over the production. So that means like farmers have absolute, that's now lack of a better word, but like a well-positioned space for them to grow, preserve seed, and share the food. So the whole production chain of the food industry. So the food systems that honor each region and its uniqueness. That is food sovereignty.
Exactly. And the term that is usually used in these, big conventions is food security, precisely because they don't want to talk about food sovereignty.
Yeah, because security is you have enough to eat.
Exactly. But then you have no independence. You have no sovereignty over your food, which is what they don't like. Yeah.
Well, now there's the question of who holds the sovereignty. Are you saying that that a community or a nation needs to have that control? How about transnational corporate agriculture? Is its presence a loss of sovereignty for a country?
So, Cliff, maybe just to back it up a little bit, I would say at a national level, policies should favor food sovereignty, because I think sovereignty looks different for each group of people in a nation. So if policies are not geared towards management decisions that will enable each group of people to thrive in their production of food, that's how you actually see big policies that support green revolution being spread into all the country, into every person in the country and region, regardless of how much rainfall they have, what kind of soils they have. So making policies that are friendly to enabling food sovereignty. I think that's the role of the governments.
Yeah. And I mean, food sovereignty, I think, should be seen as a right. The people have the right to food sovereignty, but it's very important to keep in mind what Precious just said, which is that it has to be culturally appropriate food, right? Perhaps what my idea of what is culturally appropriate in terms of food is different from, another country or other people, or and I would argue that what a corporation perceives as a culturally appropriate food is often not very culturally appropriate, because it entails a whole process which would probably be more expensive than what they would be willing to produce or to pay for the price of food, of developing that food.
Well, to apply this to Mexico, for example, as a result of NAFTA, Mexico's economy was reoriented toward export.
Mhm.
And now an agricultural system that used to produce food for the Mexican people is now producing food for export to North American markets.
That's
Now,
right.
is that a loss of sovereignty?
There you go. Precisely. Yes, that's right.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's all adopted from the idea of Green Revolution of feeding the world. That's what pushes this industrious form of agriculture. I think that it should be each community nourishing themselves.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, and that that also brings back the idea of having local ecological systems of food production, and that goes back to systems that are being threatened and constantly undermined by industrial systems of agriculture.
Mm.
I mean, they
Yeah. And if I
really-
go to Cliff, yeah, and Cliff, you said something about sustainability.
Well, yes,
What
exactly.
was that question?
And your mention of green revolution brings me to that question of sustainability. Because one of the problems with the green revolution is that it promotes a kind of agriculture that is not sustainable, that it impoverishes the soil, that and actually and the wider environment is destroyed too. There was an interesting article in the New York Times today about a lagoon in southern Spain that used to be a beautiful tourist attraction, but is now described as green slime because nitrogen runoff from agricultural fertilizers that are being used. I mean, isn't that part of the cost that has been visited on societies by the green revolution, an agriculture
Mm.
and an environment that is not sustainable?
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah. So I mean, I think let me use a little bit of what we've been learning in using the holistic decision making framework. So this lagoon that you're describing, maybe when they first implemented the farming practices that they were implementing, the idea is usually when we chase after practices because they look good and we do not put them in perspective of environment that we are managing, we tend to have what we call unintended consequences because we sort of, I'll use the word reductionist, we sort of reduce a big living system into small parts where we will probably target, for example, if I were to use some of the Green Revolution strategies, bumper harvest, like having a bumper harvest. What does it mean to have a bumper harvest? So you just get onto the land as a way of extracting and having a good harvest. And then at what cost? What else will be impacted by this decision of using these implements and tools? So for example, if you use this broader decision making to say this action that we're about to take, what are the impacts to the ecology of the place? What are the impacts to the culture and these people, like socially, what will it do? And economically, over time, what is the impact? So then if we tend to more look at making decisions towards an objective or a goal, which makes us miss lots of other things that could go wrong. So yeah, just to analyze the story that you've just shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's kind of it's the whole idea of the true cost of food that doesn't take into account precisely that, the negative externalities, right? So what's the impact of what I'm doing? What's both the impact of industrial agriculture, which it's pretty negative, and what's the impact, the beneficial impact of, regenerative agriculture, which should be, taken into consideration as when we talk about policies, when we talk about taxes, when we talk about subsidies, that's usually not considered in the equation.
Mhm. Yeah,
Now,
and I think even in the regeneration movement in itself, there's no copy and paste. So I think regeneration is a framework, more than a package of tools for you to use. There are principles of regeneration. There are principles of the broader regeneration that all agricultural practices or practices of healing the earth must promote diversity, must bring people together, must bring social justice, must bring economic upliftment to people. So I think if you consider that framework, that's what helps you take this set of tools that will be relevant for your own environment. So, but you can have a mistake where you say, so I'll use all the tools in the regenerative toolbox. What if they don't apply to your own region? So true regeneration is not copy and paste. So it's diverse in every setting and culture and group of people.
Cuba is one country that has been very critical of the Green Revolution, and they have moved quite a substantial way toward organic agriculture, away from the industrial agriculture. That was in part out of necessity, when, as a result of the collapse of their trade relations with the Soviet Union, they could no longer get fertilizers, could no longer get fuels, etc. And so they had to basically recover the organic agricultural traditions that were part of the peasantry, and as a result, Cuba's become in many ways a pioneer of organic agriculture. Celia, do you want to talk about that some?
Sure. Well, we discussed this before, and how that the lack of supplies, basically, or inputs more than supplies from the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries. What it implied, as you very well mentioned, is the fact that all of a sudden they had to come up with a new model of agriculture, and I think that kind of the part when that was more visible was during the special period, if I'm not wrong, and that had to do also because they weren't able to import as much food, so they had to start basically providing for their own food, but at the same time growing their own food without any fertilizers, inputs. But what that did is that at the same time, so you're losing production, but you're starting to create a type of
transition.
And you start exactly, and they started doing seed saving. They started doing biofertilizers, biopesticides. They started understanding the whole concept of and applying biological control. So I would say that it's kind of amazing how in Cuba they were doing composting and humus at a large scale in like such a small country, in such a small island. They had even more production of those supplies than countries like Mexico or others. So I guess I'm talking about new techniques, but it's actually recovering old techniques and coming up with alternatives because of control. And it's just, I think that that kind of shows how smart they were in creating that that transition and actually being able to recreate this idea of I guess food sovereignty. I think that also what worked very well in Cuba was the creation of the UBPC, like Unidades Básicas like co-ops, right? So they would create also cooperatives where people, and this is one of the big things, people were able to use the land and access the land, which is, land tenure is one of the big issues for agroecology all over the world. And I think that the fact that they were able to access land allowed for self-management and localized food systems. So I guess the transition was necessary because of a very painful and particular situation, but it basically created or laid the ground, yes, for a real and strong network of organic agriculture in Cuba, and institutionalized as well. So the government actually did launch, and I think this was like early 2000 programs for urban agriculture, national urban agriculture, organic in Cuba, bio-intensive food production at urban areas as well. So it was also supported by the government as well. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to see the development of organic food production and support to small farmers in Cuba.
And interestingly, it is exactly those small farmers that produce most of the domestically produced
Yep.
food in Cuba.
That's right.
However, that's a small part of agriculture, and Cuba still depends upon an import of much of its food.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly does not have food sovereignty.
Not yet.
Right. I see
But
that.
I think they're building slowly towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that requires a larger restructuring of agriculture, apparently.
Yeah.
Which I don't fully understand, but I see that Liz Mestris has a question. So if you'll unmute yourself, Liz.
Hi. First of all, I just wanted to congratulate you all. I spent a large part of Saturday watching your events, and it was incredibly inspiring and impressive, the degree of how this movement is actually unfolding. I think, are you planning to do this annually for one thing?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. Yeah, we need to. Anyway, I watched all of Africa and Latin America and some of North America.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a busy Sunday.
Yeah, it was, but it was. I'm totally into it, and knowing nothing about farming, and being a city girl totally, and not growing my own food. But the one thing, I'm also interested in, like, particularly the areas on how do you support local, and there were so many different campaigns around that. And I was thinking about San Miguel, because it looks like the small producers have been really hurt in the pandemic. And like, how do we find out what they need? In this kind of context, if you have any thoughts on that.
That's interesting, Liz. And yes, that I think that, interesting though, what I've seen throughout the pandemic is that people have been more aware of, the positive effects of healthy eating. And I think that they've been reaching more small farmers. They've been, if you talk about the Tosma or the Tianguis, they even been able to actually thrive. I've noticed in certain areas, like, here at the Biorgánica Ranch, there's definitely people have continued to come and support. However, I do think that one of the things that we need to do is to come up with a good directory, like a good map of small farmers, small producers, and make sure that consumers go directly to producers. And I think that that's a project that was started many years ago. But somehow when they did that, green directory for San Miguel, and I think Rick was involved in that, and somehow, Rick left and that was dropped. But I think that's something that should be implemented again, so that people know who is who behind what they are eating. And, and I understand that some people are more comfortable going to the city market now, or still going to La Mega, but it's, that was kind of crazy to me, that in a town like San Miguel, that we already had, huge supermarkets, we needed yet another big box, store getting into town. That was
Well,
not.
I've heard one theory that it has to do with money laundering, not necessarily business. It's very possible. Who knows? I don't understand. But
Wouldn't surprise me.
we've been talking about like mapping, not only producers, because I understand Via Organica has started working on a directory, but also like who do they sell to? What markets have produce? What restaurants are local or organic or both?
Exactly.
Because I think that would that's something that could be done, and there's actually some interest of involving some students in that.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great if we could talk, the folks at Tosma, Rancho La Sabina, La Cosecha, Via Organica. We kind of know who is who. Let's take advantage of that, and that would be good if we could get students to map that.
Okay. Well,
Why not?
We'll get together. Yeah,
There
to
you
me,
go.
this is the time. I think people are aware of health. They want to
Yes.
support. They know food chains break down, all of this. But like, yeah. Anyway, okay, we'll be in touch.
We'll get a project.
Okay, Liz, before you go, I just got an email from someone who's having trouble getting into the through our website. I don't know
Yeah.
what the problem is, but
I don't see anybody asking for admission, but I'm not a co-host.
uh-huh.
No.
But yeah, you can get in either, you can get in, so they just need to try harder.
Well,
I mean, I did it through our website.
okay,
And you can go either to YouTube or to Zoom there.
right. And maybe she's succeeded by now. But in any case, on this question of a green map for San Miguel, that's something that could be done by any community anywhere. And it's an example that would be replicable and of value, because it would help to promote local production. I mean, one of the problems with industrial agriculture is that the production of food and then shipping it hundreds, if not thousands of miles has quite an impact on the climate. And locally supported agriculture would be an important contribution that could be made, fostered by local green maps.
Yes, I agree. We should come up with one for Victoria Falls. What do you think, Precious?
I would like to ask you a question. Well, first of all, to congratulate you, the effort that you made. It's quite amazing, 24 hours. And the question has to do with that effort, really. What are you planning? What do you plan to do with all the material that you have? Because it's a resource. It's a fountain of many knowledge. For instance, I'm thinking perhaps from the educational point of view, what do you plan to do with such a material? Because you put forward some variety of cases of how to produce food. For instance, I was shocked by the fact that 75 of the food we eat comes from nine items, only nine items, or 55 of the food comes from only three. So it's amazing that bottom line, I think many people simply don't know what alternatives we have, how to produce more variety. And another thing that I saw quite shocked was the Ronnie Cummings intervention, all the possibilities that the agaves have. And again, we as Mexicans, for instance, don't do that because we don't know the possibilities the agave has. So I guess you open with your effort an opportunity in educational terms to put forward with many channels, many means to make this available for a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely, Roberto, you're right. I mean, so what's next? What do we do with all of this, right? One part of what we do is, as Regeneration International, we work a lot on education and communication. So one of the things we want to do with all these different clips that we have is they are still available, of course, on our YouTube channel and Facebook channels, but we want to create shorter versions of it as well. We would like to also have them translated in some cases, as we know that there's English speakers, Spanish speakers, Portuguese, French, at least in 4 languages, so they're available in multiple languages. And one of the main things that people want to see is that part which is the do-it-yourself. The people are eager to learn more about how they can have some autonomy. How do I, even keep seeds? How do I have a small garden? How do I make compost tea? How do I, make a very healthy salad? Silly things like those that you would be surprised, or other things, which is, like we live here in the Bajío. Can we have agave plants? Okay, so if I plant an agave, how long do I have to wait for that agave to grow? Along which other trees can I plant that agave so that actually I can, sequester carbon, fix nitrogen, mix them in a way that I can create a forage. And then by the end of the life of the agave plant, I can actually have pulque or mezcal or tequila or, you name it. So I think we presented so many cases of viable practices, of viable crops that are good for nature, good for the planet, and that they are actually economically viable. So we want to make sure that people can access that information on the videos, probably make shorter versions, because we understand it's a lot to go over, 4 hours again for the whole thing, and just like make clips and have them subtitle. That's kind of the idea, Precious, right?
That's kind of the idea. And I think, more than just having materials for people to access, but I think that we also created a cross-pollination in the people that were speaking. What I saw in the African group, people are now collaborating to say, hey, I'll need you in my project. So we also created a space for meeting for these amazing practitioners. But yes, definitely, these will be available in smaller bites and can be used across platforms. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was an important outcome for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And the partnerships that then develop afterwards. It was one of our outcomes as well. Yeah. And also this was a trial run. So we also got some lessons as the team, which obviously when we build on to the next event will definitely be, I guess you get better and better over time, but it was a nice first shot. We're really proud of our small team. Yeah.
So you have what, like 24 hours worth of material on YouTube? That's an incredible resource.
Yeah, true. A whole 24 hours. Wow. Okay.
When you think about it, it's pretty good, huh?
Yeah, very good.
And
Yeah,
you're gonna do that next year again.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we had a pretty good reach. I'm looking at some of the stats. This is, this is from October 16th. So we need to get the updated stats. Precious will probably get them tomorrow if we have a meeting. But
tomorrow, yeah.
What I saw just on Facebook is the Africa, Europe, and Middle East session had over 450K reach and 111K views just on Facebook. Over 80K reach on part 1 of the North American session. So this was still happening. And 1.5K people watching the Latin American session. So not bad.
No.
I'm happy with that. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. And people were engaged.
Very
I think
good.
that,
Yeah, the reach was very good. Honestly, it was really amazing.
And how was it publicized?
It was mainly through, our partners as well, but it was mainly throughout Facebook and in our network. We sent a lot of, newsletters, social media. Instagram was actually a big hit, which was amazing. A lot of people seeing that on Instagram and Twitter. But it helped that there were 50 plus organizations, and some of which are also global networks themselves, like IFOAM or Savory Institute.
Yeah, well, the Center for Global Justice promoted
the
it
Center
through
for
our
Global
listserv.
Justice. That's right.
But
there you go.
We're small fry.
No, but it's good. It's good that all of us. It was a collaborative effort. So it was good.
Yeah, definitely.
Back to this matter of local production for local consumption. Of course, that requires national policies that support that. And so one of the things that one has to pay attention to is how to influence national governments. I mean, in the case of Mexico, like I said, it was because of NAFTA and the federal withdrawal of supports for small scale campesino agriculture that we got basically a collapse of that, and large numbers of campesinos displaced from the land, having to migrate to the cities or to the north. To reverse that in order to really promote local agriculture, you not only need green maps, but you also need green national policies that promote local agriculture, with subsidies, access to markets, etc. To what extent is Regeneration International involved in promoting such policy changes at the national level?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak for yes, like our efforts in general as a network. So we're definitely thin in terms of staff membership, but we make varied contributions through active networks that we are partnering with. For example, in Africa, we work through AFSA as a partner. So we engage also in contributing towards, I think, helping to develop a food systems policy and influence the actual African Union, which then attaches to different member countries. And also through enabling smallholder farmer groups, their voice in the market and in the actual practice of farming and taking care of the environment. I think definitely we're working with partners to build voice from the ground up as well. Yeah. And I think we have lots of campaigns.
Yeah.
So Essie
Yeah.
can dive into that, I think.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things is, for instance, we are part of the Global Alliance for Organic Districts. So the Global Alliance for Organic Districts it's an organization which members are Regeneration International, the Asian Local Government for Organic Agriculture, and the International Network of Ecoregions. So these are basically bio-districts that do have state support, you know, in this case, at a regional level. But it's mayors and governors in different parts of the world who are trying to sort of accelerate the implementation of regenerative agriculture, where they call it, you know, sustainable organic, in the case of the Philippines, or they call it ecoregion in the case of the International Network of Ecoregions. But it's basically a conglomerate or an alliance of members, organization members, and countries who are part of a whole system of, okay, you got experts from Regeneration International or IFOAM, and then you have government officers in cities who actually have the willingness to either transition or become organic districts with everything that implies. So it's actually moving forward, and it's interesting how more and more local governments and municipalities are understanding the importance of becoming carbon neutral and understanding the role that agriculture plays in being able to. And that's, you know, that even happens in the case of Costa Rica, in the case of Uruguay, in certain regions in Chile, who are also part of the Global Alliance of Organic Districts as well.
May I?
Yes.
I would like to introduce a new term. Well, a term that's present. The term is technology and the scales. Because, for instance, Cliff has mentioned the government intervention related basically to the scales, to the reach that the programs could have in terms of scale. One question that I would like to raise is in terms of the scales, but within platforms, the public platforms. I have read, for instance, very important, very well. I don't know. I'm sure you must know the cases of India, where they have developed very important platforms to address the main social problems. That it is not enough to have 2 or 3 organizations working together. In order to really address the problems, has to do with everyone. I mean, organizations, individuals, government, but from the start point, thinking of scales if the problem is in a large scale, the forces has to meet this scale. So and the technology works an important role in this approach, because, for instance, in India, they have developed very strong built digital digital infrastructure in order to share many knowledge, many efforts, many cases, many resources. So it is a technological resource that is there and has to be taken into account.
Yes, I think that, you know, the idea of technology, I mean, we couldn't have done this summit on Saturday unless we had platforms of technology that enabled that. So definitely we need to have a good use of technology. And I believe that it helps these kind of platforms and alliances to grow. You know, we're a network of networks all over the world. If we didn't have technology, there's no way we could be working together or scaling up our work or giving visibility to it. So that's, I think, very, very important. You know, there's a thin line between that and the digitalization of, in our case, agriculture, which can be sometimes, you know, dangerous, and we may get to a point where we're creating a, you know, an agriculture without hands, which is scary. But I think we, you know, we don't have to go.
And I think the issue of networks growing, also I think the smallholder farmer networks, if we also invested in storytelling, so that we enable a broad sharing of successes and sharing the struggles that they face and how they overcome them. But also this can always be spread through the amazing tool of social media, you know. And I think all these tools are also useful to everyone, including smallholder farmers, because I think there's always been a gap between people on the ground who are actually doing the work and the world. And so I think there's lots of now building those bridges to make sure that information flows and consumers are aware of the effort being put by small farmers and vice versa. So, yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left. It's late in Zimbabwe, where Precious is. So we should wrap it up shortly. Let me present one other question that struck me, Celia, as you were introducing the reason for this People's Food Summit. You talked about how the UN was being used to promote a corporate food agenda. And my understanding is that corporations are doing that on a number of other issues too, using the UN as a vehicle for basically, you know, shaping the global conversation on policies. Can you say any more about that?
Sure. I think, well, I think there's a reason why we need to have certain organizations like ETC, like GRAIN, like Regeneration International, being present in those conversations as watchdogs. I think there's a language that is being used by those corporations that makes it sound like if they were on our side. And so we hear things like, you know, nature-based solutions, right? They talk about that as if they were putting nature in front of everything. And we hear that from, Nestle, Danone, Unilever, even, Dow, Syngenta. So we're hearing more and more nature-based solution, climate smart agriculture. They're even using the term regenerative in some of their propaganda. So I think what we need to do is we need to be cautious. We need to be pointing out what they are saying, because it may be misleading for some folks out there who are not very aware of what regenerative really means, not just regenerative agriculture, but regenerative in general. And we need to be pointing out what is already happening with organizations like the CGIAR, which is the consultative group on international agricultural research, which plays a big role in UN conventions, not just on climate, but also on the certification and biodiversity as well. They have 15 centers throughout the world, but they have very powerful centers in Latin America, basically. And the CGIAR has a large budget, in part provided by the UN, in part provided by the World Bank. And one of the things that they're doing is training top scientists in all these different countries to make sure that they can take breeding material and privatize it. So it's once again this type of companies and corporations recreating the green revolution and getting their hands on the whole food system. So we got to be careful. We need to point out the who's who and who's behind all of this, and realize that the willingness to digitalize, to come back with paid patents, and to come back with yet another wave of privatization of our food system is stronger than ever. That means that we need to be stronger than ever as a response to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was reading one of the reports of the World Economic Forum, which is the global think tank for transnational corporations. And you're right, the language is often very obscure and needs to be decoded. And you have to read between the lines frequently to see what the agenda really is.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So.
Yeah, Precious, you were going to say something. No. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I think Eric covered most of the things. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we need to wrap it up with that. There's much more that could be covered. And of course, you can always go to Regeneration International's YouTube channel and see some of that material. But I understand that for Spanish speakers, that you are doing a presentation in Spanish on Wednesday, is it?
That's right. I'm doing a presentation for Educación Colaborativa that's going to be in Spanish. It's on Wednesday. I believe it's at noon.
3 o'clock. 3 o'clock.
Oh, 3.
3
Okay.
o'clock in the afternoon.
I'm gonna write it down so then I don't get confused. 3 o'clock. Okay, great. Yes, so we'll see you there in Spanish Wednesday at 3 p.m. Precious, you don't have to be there. Don't worry. Because it's in Spanish.
Yes, that would be quite late at night.
That would be
you.
past your midnight. So yeah, I think that would ruin our friendship.
Yeah, that will break our friendship, definitely. Yeah. No,
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity of having been able to share with you, and
Yeah.
you know that anytime you can count on us. If you have any questions, comments, whatever it is, you got my email and my contact, so feel free to get in touch.
And
Mm.
I want, and
Thank you.
I want to thank both of you, both Cecilia and Precious, for the time you've given us and for the information that you've shared. It's been a very stimulating and wide-ranging conversation.
Thank
Today's
you.
today's webinar, as well as past programs, are all available on YouTube at the Global Justice Center's YouTube channel, accessible from our website, globaljusticecenter.org. And let me also invite you next week to join us again on Monday for our next webinar, What is Fueling Climate Change? In preparation for COP26, we are having this special program with 4 specialists on various aspects of factors that are contributing to climate change, some of which you know about, but some of which you may not be so aware of. And so join us next Monday at 1 o'clock for that. And finally, let me thank our webinar team, Roberto Robles, Liz Mestras, Gregory Diamant, Olivia Canales, and myself. And now this is Cliff Durand signing off until next Monday.
Hasta luego.
Luego.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks again.